Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Class 6 on the Lays of Beleriand. We are, I was going to say we were moving our way through, but of course you will notice last time we didn't move our way through the actual poem so very quickly. But that's okay. That's okay. We're gonna totally catch up tonight. Quick announcements first. I've mentioned our fall classes. We're starting to get to, we've only got about 10 more days left before the fall semester starts. So again, that's our Anglo-Saxon class with Michael Drought, Tolkien's Wars in Middle-earth with John Garth, and the third one, the Star Wars class, of course, the one I've been announcing for longest. Amy Sturgis' Star Wars class. Really great slate of classes this term, so I definitely want to make sure that you look into those. Also, remember that this week is the beginning of Season 1 of the Silmarillion film project, so we're going to start actually mapping out our first season of theoretical episodes starting on Friday, so that's this Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And the episode, this is a big episode because we're going to be going actually through all 13 episodes of season 1 and doing a plot outline for the entire season. So it's definitely a big episode for season 1 here at the beginning. And I will also, as I have been of late, I will be able to again this week do my stream from The Lord of the Rings Online as I take my my little Hobbit character to Weathertop and the Lone Lands this week. So that should be a lot of fun. And finally, I wanted to make another exciting announcement. Not that those weren't exciting announcements, but I want to make an even more exciting announcement. We have another live event that is a live, real-world, actually get-together in-person event, like Mythmoot, except it's going to be a little bit smaller and therefore in some ways easy to attend. This is Midmoot, or to give it its properest name, the Mythgard Mid-Atlantic Speculative Fiction Symposium. I love the full name of the Mythgard Mid-Atlantic Speculative Fiction Symposium. This is going to be happening at the University of Maryland on Saturday, October 3rd. It's a one-day conference, so it's just, it'll start mid-morning and go until dinner time. It's going to be a really great, cool event. I'm going to be there. More importantly, our guest of honor at Midmoot, as we still call it, affectionately, is going to be Dr. Verlin Flieger, who is going to be talking about the new Kullervo book, which is just being released very soon. So if you want to hear Dr. Flieger talk about her experience with editing the latest Tolkien book to hit the shelves, and if you want to, and going to be able to follow up and ask questions yourself, Dr. Flieger is just a wonderful, wonderful person, and a really, just one of the top Tolkien scholars in the world. A really great person to be able to hear from. Also going to be attending, who's actually going to be interviewing her at the conference, is going to be Carl Hostetter, one of the greatest living scholars of Quenya, of Tolkien's languages. So Carl is going to be there. He's going to be interviewing her. So it should be a really great venue to be able, a great chance to meet lots of Tolkien scholars. It's, as I say, it's only one day long. It's really inexpensive. The registration fee is only $10. So I think this is a really great opportunity. So to find this, go to the mythgard.org, the events tab, and the first thing on the events tab here, and you can find the full information, the registration link. And this should be great fun. I am really looking forward to that. Sarah King is asking, how do you register for the film workshop? That is a good question. I believe it should be on silmfilm.mythgard.org is where that should be. I don't have that one queued up here, but yes, that should be where the new Silmfilm is. Also, if you watch the social media outlets for Mythgard or Signum or mine, the Tolkien Professor ones, I just posted one on my Twitter feed, for instance, yesterday. The link, they should also be findable there too. All right. So I hope some of you will be. I hope to get a chance to meet some of you at this event that we're doing here. And this is. I'm one of the other reasons that I'm really excited about this event. I really hope that this is that kind of thing that we're able to do in other regions too. So, I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how that goes in that way. Good. Kate Neville says the link is on Facebook. Okay, good. Excellent. All right. Let's get back to the poem, because we're still at the beginning of Canto 1 and we were supposed to be at the end of Canto 4. So we still have quite some distance yet to travel here this evening. So let's go ahead. The overall title that I gave to today's class is Release from Bondage. And the main reason I did that is, of course, that's what sort of it's the subtitle of the poem, right? That's sort of what Luthian means. And I love that name, the Release from Bondage, as a title, an overarching title of the story of Beren and Luthian. I find that to be one of the most sort of intriguing and complex titles that Tolkien gave anything that he wrote. I love thinking about that concept, the concept of release from bondage. Evocative, Kate, is exactly the word for it. I love thinking about release from bondage and all of the various ways in which that idea is applicable to the poem. It's going to come up at many points in tonight's class, so I just want to, the main reason I put that as the title is just to kind of invite us to be continuing to come back to that idea as we go through, as we look at this, because we are going to be looking at a pretty big span of the poem tonight, at least that's the goal. So remember last time in Canto 2 where we were looking at we started with the description of King Morgoth and the interesting sort of parallel, how we have King Thingle at the beginning and the very impressive description of him who's sounding extremely regal and very wealthy and very powerful, and sort of his reach in his forest kingdom. And then we have King Morgoth, right? And I would emphasize the King Morgoth in this, and his his profundity, right? Remember those lines which described him as being older and stronger than the stones and more fierce and dire than the fires of the earth. It's pretty big stuff, right? Whereas Thingol was in the midst of life, he was in the midst of the forest and the beasts and everything, and his hand was over them. But we have this isolation and desolation that's described around Morgoth. So it's a really fascinating and pretty hard to avoid the idea that it's a very deliberate counterpoint between those two. Now I want to continue after that, because this is all of this, the beginning of Canto 2 here, is given to us in large part because this is the new context for Beren, right? So let's look at this first paragraph, sort of stanza line grouping here, continues, sort of completes that initial description, that initial portrait of King Morgoth. Unconquerable spears of steel were at his nod. No ruth did feel the legions of his marshalled hate, on whom did wolf and raven wait. And black the ravens sat and cried upon their banners black, and wide was heard their hideous chanting dread above the reek and trampled dead. With fire and sword his ruin red on all that would not bow the head, like lightning fell. The northern land lay groaning neath his ghastly hand. Notice how again we have that image of the land lying under his hand, right? The woodland was described as being under the hand of Thingol in stanza 1, but now we have the northern land is groaning neath his ghastly hand, right? A little bit different. With fire and sword his ruin red on all that would not bow the head, like lightning fell. This emphasis on the absolute force with which he rules, right? The thoroughness of his tyranny. Also, there's not any sense of borders, right? Thingol's realm, though strong, is very clearly bounded, right? We've got Doriath and the borders of Doriath, in which we hear evidence already of of Melian, of the girdle of Melian, that is of the sort of the madness that afflicts people who try to get in and all that stuff. Morgoth's realm has no boundaries. It's a much more sort of imperial place, right? Yeah, Kate says there are still hints of alliteration, as if Tolkien just can't help himself. Yes, it's true. We do, on whom did wolf and raven wait, and black the raven sat and cried upon their banners black and wide. You hear all those B's and W's in there, right? Yeah, absolutely. It's just... Tolkien was so sensitive to the sound of words, and it's one of the things that I love. It's one of the things I find so rewarding about reading Tolkien's poetry carefully, is that there's very little that is sort of wasted in it. You know, he doesn't usually... it's not that it's all perfect or that it all works perfect, but it all has a kind of force. He never just tosses stuff out there. And you can hear the way in which he is sort of appealing to the various kinds of sort of music and sound effects that you can make through words, both through rhyme and through rhythmic changes and through alliteration and assonance. I just love reading his poetry. But now we continue on, and this is the really important transition. And that here is the really fascinating thing. Of course, we saw this to some extent already modeled in the last stanza, right, or the last canto. In Canto 1, we have Thingle the mighty king, right, and how awesome he is, but then we have this sort of transition. But greatest of all the things in his realm was his daughter, Luthian, right? And so we have Luthian. So the focal point is sort of on the king, but then it shifts to Luthian, theoretically. Here we have the same thing, right? King Morgoth, and how awful he is and how powerful he is, but still there lived in hiding cold, undaunted, Barahir the bold, of land bereaved, of lordship shorn, who once a prince of men was born, and now an outlaw lurked and lay in the hard heath and woodland grey, and with him clung of faithful men but Baron his son and other 10. Yeah, so Nancy, there is a third king, right? Well, he once was a king and now he's an outlaw, right? So again, just as we had Thingle, but actually it's Luthian, right? Here we have Morgoth, but Barahir, right? And I would, see the emphasis on his boldness, right? There's already, that undaunted is one of the first adjectives it's the first adjective that's used of him, right? We get it before we get his name. Undaunted and bold are the two adjectives that sort of frame Barahir's name when he's introduced, right? We get the boldness, the stubbornness of him, even though he's lost his realm, right? He was he was born a prince of men. He has no realm anymore. He only now has his son Baron and 10 other men, but yet he still defies the king, who clearly, given the fact that we're told that he was born a prince of men, the King Morgoth, who is plainly in the role of usurper here to Barahir in Barahir's kingdom, nevertheless he continues to defy him and to live as an outlaw. And this is where I would lay particular stress on the King Morgoth thing, right? It might be easy for, we're used to thinking about Morgoth, very familiar to us, right? So it's kind of tempting, I think, for Silmarillion readers to just kind of skip over the king business, right? Yeah, Morgoth, okay, I know who you're talking about, right? No. This is King Morgoth, and I think that's important because in the Silmarillion, the published Silmarillion, Baron and Barahir, they live as like refugees. They live, but they're not exactly outlaws. To say they're outlaws suggests that there's a sort of a king who's ruling over them, right, and whose laws they are defying, rather than just an enemy from which they are fleeing, or the encroaching enemy, which so they're sort of guerrilla resistance leaders of their small band. But it's not exactly like a full-blown Robin Hood situation in the published Silmarillion, because there's no king. It's just, we're going to use guerrilla tactics to hide out from and resist the overwhelmingly powerful invading enemy force, right? So the the element of outlawry, I think, is particularly interesting in the Lay of Lothian, and gives a particular flavor, if that's the way of saying it, to Barahir and Beron's heroism. And it's a flavor that, again, I don't think is there in the same way in the Silmarillion. Beren and Barahir's holding out in Dorthonion in the Silmarillion feels to me more like Húrin saying "Day shall come again" as he stands in the fens of Serech, right? That is, the stubborn, self-sacrificing, standing against an impossibly superior foe until the night falls, right? That seems to be what Beren and Barahir are doing in Tar Nufuin. It's not that it's totally different, it's not that it has nothing in common, but as I say, it's a different flavor from there is a king who rules this land, an evil king, an evil usurping king who rules this land, and we are going to live a life of outlaws within this realm that once was our own, and we are going to just sort of resist and defy his law. Kate Neville says it contrasts to the outlawry of Turin with his band of not-so-merry men and elves, absolutely. Yeah, Turin and his... What would be the opposite of merry men? Turin and his grim-faced men? I'm not quite sure. But anyway, that's... I mean, Kate, that is a really interesting point of contrast, I agree. Sarah King, I love that. Turin and his morbid men. it's like the denotation is not quite right, but I love the word there. Gloomy. Okay, I can do with I can go gloomy. I feel like it has to be a bisyllabic word, right? Grim doesn't work. Dour I like conceptually, Jim, but again, the one syllable doesn't roll off the tongue quite so much. Sober, Michael, yeah. Though that's, with the alcohol, it's like, it makes it just sound like they're teetotalers, right? Which is not necessarily the thing. I still like morbid, Sarah. It doesn't quite fit, but it's still my favorite. Anyway, okay. Okay, so as you say, it's an outlaw thing. It's the particular kind of heroism that we see Beren and his father Barahir involved in. Now let's look at Gorlim. The story of Gorlim, this of course, as Christopher points out, and we'll come back to this in a little bit, is the origin of the Gorlim story. It bursts into being here in the A manuscript of the Lay of Lothian. Those who remember from the Book of Lost Tales, we did not get any history. When Beren showed up in Doriath, or Artenor as it was at the time, and first saw Luthian, or that is Tinuviel as she was at the time, and they did their, dancing and looking out at her from the bushes and chasing after her, and Tinuviel, that whole overall sequence happened. But where Beren was coming from and why he was there, he had been on a long journey. But remember, he was an elf back in the Tale of Tinuviel. He wasn't a man. And he didn't have this sort of outline. He was not heroic. He had some stature. He had a sort of a recognizable name, but he was certainly not coming from anywhere like this. But anyway, so Gorlim. Now we have Gorlim. Does anyone remember Gorlim's epithet in the Silmarillion? What's he called? Gorlim the what? Gorlim the Unhappy. Yeah. Gorlim the Unhappy. What does that mean? Yes, Karita. It means primarily, and Nancy, it means primarily unlucky. Tolkien often uses hap in its old sense, and hap is that's unfortunate is the synonym. But of course, fortuna, that's Latin, right? Hap is the good old English word for fortune. So to be unhappy just means to be unlucky, to be unfortunate. So Gorlim the Unhappy, as he's called in the Silmarillion, he's Gorlim the Unfortunate. Of course he is, Nancy, as you point out, unhappy in the modern sense as well. But I think that the fact that he is labeled Gorlim the unhappy, Gorlim the unfortunate, this is true in a couple different cases, and I think that the senses in which Gorlim is unhappy in this story are really drawn out in this version, and we see that the circumstances around Gorlim's situation are certainly very different. I've said before, and I'm going to bring this back up again more in a little bit. I don't spend a lot of time going over the stuff that Christopher Tolkien does in his commentary when you read his commentaries at the ends of the cantos, and especially the number one thing he's focused on doing in those is showing the similarities and differences between this, sort of showing where this fits, what's changed since the Book of Lost Tales, and what's different between this version and the Silmarillion version. Of course, he does a great job of pointing out the major differences. Because his primary goal in editing the History of Middle-earth series is to show the development of the story. How did the stories change over time? How did these tales grow in Tolkien's mind as he went through? But what he doesn't do, it does sometimes, but what he certainly doesn't do all the time, is say, so what? Right? Okay, so it's different. What's the effect of that? Right? Okay, so he will explain what are the differences between Gorlim's story here in the Lay and as we see it in the published Silmarillion, and he's very good on that list of differences. But what I want to talk about is, again, where he never doesn't quite go, which is, so what? What is the effect? What is the story of Gorlim? What is the emphasis on the story of Gorlim as we get it here in this poem compared to what we see in the Silmarillion? So let's look. I have I have a couple sort of longish passages on Gorlim because I want to make sure to sort of get the thing here. So context here. Remember, he's come by the house and has seen, so he's not been there, right? He doesn't unlike in the Silmarillion where he routinely comes back to he has this nagging doubt in the Silmarillion, remember? Is Ionel really dead? Maybe she got away and she's coming back to wait for me, so I'm going to go back and check and make sure. And the fact that he goes back there is observed by the spies of Sauron, and it's Sauron, not Morgoth, who's in charge of this business, so that they know that he comes there, and knowing that he comes there, they set a snare for him there deliberately, right? That's how the story comes about in the Silmarillion version. That's distinctly different from the beginning. Gorlim comes here and he's never been there, but he sees this vision, right? But then he hears people chasing him, and I remember the first time I read this, I expected when he hears the people chasing after him, they were going to catch him, because that's what happens in the Silmarillion, right? When he sees the vision, he feels the hands of Sauron's hunters grabbing onto him, but of course that's not what happens. He runs, and that's where it's his running away here where we begin this passage. Lest Eilonel with him they slay, without a word he turned away, and like a wild thing, winding led his devious ways o'er stony bed of stream and over quaking fen, until far from the homes of men he lay beside his fellows few in a secret place. And darkness grew and waned, and still he watched unsleeping, and saw the dismal dawn come creeping in dank heavens above gloomy trees. A sickness held his soul for ease and hope, and even thraldom's chain, if he might find his wife again. But all he thought, twixt love of lord and hatred for the king abhorred, and anguish for fair Eilonel, who drooped alone, what tale shall tell? What's the emphasis here on Gorlim's story? Starting with the fact that he is not captured at that moment, right? The fact that he gets away, and that we see this. Nancy, it is incredibly painful, isn't it? This anguish of Gorlim, how we see him going over and over this. Again, remember, it's not in the Silmarillion. We had that nagging doubt in his mind from the beginning, right? Now this doubt has just thrust upon him, right? He's seen what looked like his wife, and so what does he do? He immediately tries to lead the enemies away, because he's not sure if she's there or not, but if she is there, he wants to make sure she escaped. But now he's like, did she escape? Was it even her in the first place? And if it was her, did she escape? And I mean, it's and this sickness, this torment, division twixt love of Lord and hatred for the King of Horde and anguish for fair Ionel. Notice how the poem, and we saw this in the Lay of the Children of Hurin as well, the extent to which the poem really brings us into the sort of psychological and emotional situation of the characters far more deeply than the more superficial prose versions did. There is no version of the Turin story which is more painful, which is more sort of poignant. So I think that's I think that's it seems to be a trend here, right? And so we never get this kind of agonizing on Gorlim's part in any of the prose versions, right? Karita, I agree. Karita says that she thinks this is sympathetic. She says, for me at least, it brings up that question of what I would be willing to do to save my beloved. Yeah. Now, I agree. Christopher Tolkien says in his overview here, he characterizes the Gorlim treatment, says Gorlim's treachery is made far worse, which is true. In the published Silmarillion, he's broken, right? I mean, he's captured, and he, facing torment, perhaps actually being tortured, and also being, concerned about Ionel and believing she is also a prisoner, he gives in, right? They're trying to get him to reveal Barahir's whereabouts. So all he does is cave and say, "Fine, I will tell you where Barahir is if you'll reunite me with Ionel." Right here, good, Kate. That's a great way to express it. The betrayal is more active, but it's also a deeper sorrow. And again, we are brought into this sort of emotional and psychological identification with Gorlim far, far more. Let's look at the actual betrayal here. Yet at the last, when many days of brooding did his mind amaze, he found the servants of the king, and bade them to their master bring a rebel who forgiveness sought, if haply forgiveness might be bought with tidings of Barahir the bold, and where his hidings and his hold might best be found by night or day. And thus sad Gorlim, led away unto those dark deep Dolven halls before the knees of Morgoth falls, and puts his trust in that cruel heart, wherein no truth had ever part. Quoth Morgoth, Eilonel the fair thou shalt most surely find, and there where she doth dwell and wait for thee, together shall ye ever be, and sundered shall ye sigh no more. This guerdon shall he have that bore these tidings sweet, O traitor dear. For Ionel she dwells not here, but in the shades of death doth roam, widowed of husband and of home, a wraith of that which might have been, methinks it is, that thou hast seen. Now shalt thou through the gates of pain the land thou askest grimly gain. Thou shalt to the moonless mists of hell descend, and seek thy Ionel. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Kate and Karita, that what is done to Gorlim is worse. You know what I think is the cruelest phrase, the worst thing that Morgoth says to Gorlim here is the word methinks. A wraith of that which might have been, methinks it is that thou hast seen. See the implications there? Right? Morgoth's like, I don't know what you saw. It's probably nothing, right? Just a chance, really, right? You probably imagined it. It's bad enough when, as happens in the published Silmarillion, this deliberate, illusion is put up in order to deceive Gorlim, right? But that's not what happens, right? That's not what we get in this poem. Instead, Morgoth's like, yeah, I have no idea. I don't really know what happened at all. Could be anything, right? That is, just the way that Morgoth taunts Gorlim with that, right? That is, it was all for nothing, man. Like, it was just a fluke mistake that you made. Wow, you betrayed your... I mean, I could understand if you actually had seen her, but man, you just betrayed your lord for absolutely no reason, right? Gosh, it sucks to be you, doesn't it, Gorlim? And he has Gorlim absolutely in his power. Morgoth has nothing to gain from, like, completely demoralizing him in this way, for taunting him, and not only putting him to death by torment, by physical torment, but by psychological torment as well, right? I'm just gonna twist the knife because I can. It is an incredible glimpse into Morgoth's own completely superfluous cruelty there. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Good. Rickle says, yeah, you can totally sense Morgoth's pleasure and satisfaction in the way he delivers his words. Yes, oh traitor dear, right? The sort of false affection behind it there. Even that, oh traitor dear, right? Like, he knows how much Gorlim hates him, right? And so here he's like, you're my kind of guy, right? I'm glad you and I are sort of on the same wavelength here, Gorlim, right? I mean, he knows how much that's going to burn Gorlim to hear. Just incredible. Yeah. Yana has a wonderful question. Okay, Yana says that last second to last line there, line 231. Okay, now shalt thou through the gates of pain the land that thou askest grimly gain. Thou shalt to the moonless mists of hell descend and seek thy Eilunel. And Yana says, is he referring to hell, like afterlife, hell, or to Angband, which is presumably where they are right then, because of course Angband is called the Hells of Iron, and indeed in Tolkien's early thinking, the realm of Morgoth was actually associated with a literal afterlife hell, like that's where bad people went when they died. At least that's one. For his thinking changed all around about that many times, but there was a point in the early on that was kind of on the table. So sometimes, Yana, we can still see, I mean, even the published Silmarillion, it's called the Hells of Iron, right? That word is still used, even though by the time we get to the published Silmarillion, it's pretty clear that word is being used only metaphorically, not literally, right? So, Yana, great question. Are there other occasions on which Morgoth speaks of going to hell, like when while he's sitting in Angband, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We'll come back to that, Yana. I have a theory. Or rather, I think the explanation of that supports the theory I'm going to be talking about later on. But anyway, that's a great observation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there in a minute. Okay. Yep. All right. Sorry, I'm getting all distracted here. We do get a reminder now. Again, just in case we thought that it was really true, right? Now, notice we don't know. I was just talking about how by saying methinks, Morgoth is just absolutely, torturing him egregiously there. At the time he says that, we don't actually know that. I mean, it's possible that it was a fluke, right? It's not, again, unlike the published Silmarillion, it's not a carefully orchestrated trap. It's, he's wandering by there, and then he happens to see this thing. It looks like it could be a chance, right? Why would Morgoth have that set up in advance, right? Well, we do get a glimpse sort of behind the scenes from the narrator just after this. Thus Gorlim died a bitter death, and cursed himself with dying breath, and Barahir was caught and slain, and all good deeds were made in vain. But Morgoth's guile forever failed, nor wholly o'er his foes prevailed, and some were ever that still fought, unmaking that which malice wrought. Thus men believed that Morgoth made the fiendish phantom that betrayed the soul of Gorlim, and so brought the lingering hope forlorn to naught that lived amid the lonely wood. Yet Beren had by fortune good long hunted far afield that day, and benighted in strange places lay, far from his fellows. Okay, so you see what we get here, right? One, we get the fact that he did, or at least men believe that Morgoth was lying, right? That Morgoth did make the fiendish phantom on purpose. That was in fact a trap set for Gorlim, apparently, I guess, on a, just at a hazard, right? On the outside chance that Gorlim might ever come that way or something. But but he's definitely we're definitely told, well, okay, no, we're not definitely, we're told that men believed it. It is suggested that that's the real answer to that. So that is revealed here. But notice what else is being revealed here. Just, first of all, merely the fact that we're being shown behind the scenes, right? We're shown how these things are working. He said it was chance, but we see him manipulating chance. But what else do we see in this passage? There are two other things that we see very interestingly. Right. Good. One good point, Nancy. Nancy notes that Gorlim curses himself, not Morgoth. Yes, that is an interesting point. He recognizes that although he has been placed in he's being killed by Morgoth, and it is himself still that he blames. And Nancy, I'm not sure that ultimately that's not the saddest moment of Gorlim's story. He dies believing that it was all for nothing. That he was simply an idiot. It's not that dying knowing that you were a dupe is like way better, but still, I'm not sure. Anyway, but what else do you notice? Yes, good, Sharon. Beren's good fortune is set up in contrast to Gorlim's ill fortune. Absolutely. If, as we see, yes, it was, as Morgoth said, it was by chance, right? Yeah, it was by chance, but it was by chance that Morgoth was manipulating on purpose, right? He orchestrated the thing with Gorlim. But he doesn't seem to be the only one orchestrating things, right? If Gorlim is the unhappy, Beren is the happy. Not in the modern sense necessarily, but he is the fortunate, is the word that's used. He had by fortune good, long hunted far afield that day. So, by chance, Gorlim was undone, but by chance, Beren was saved. And thus we can see this sort of sense of a battle going on behind the scenes, right? We were talking about, we were looking at a few passages in the Lay of the Children of Húrin where we seem to see some evidence that there was some back scenes battling going on, right? That we could see the Valar on one side and another kind of taking a hand in the events. Joe, yeah, Chance does seem like an active character here. I think we are supposed to be seeing that, but there's nothing in any of Tolkien's writings that gives us any reason to actually personify Chance, right? Chance is something that's clearly, or those things which appear to be chance, as has already been revealed in Morgoth's case. And again, that seems to be how this works. It's very subtle, right? Morgoth said, oh, this was chance. Turns out, oh yeah, it was chance, but Morgoth had loaded the dice. And then immediately after that, we hear Beren, by chance, wasn't there. And we were left to conclude, wait a second, maybe somebody was loading those dice as well in the other direction, right? And we have more reason to think that based upon what we hear at the beginning of this stand. Well, not at the beginning there, but what is it, line 237? But Morgoth's guile forever failed, nor wholly o'er his foes prevailed, and some were ever that still fought on making that which malice wrought. Morgoth rules, but he never completely, he's always thwarted. His victory is never perfect. It's like there's something working against him and undoing all of his plans. And that, I think, is pretty cool. Arthur, I think there is a shift I'm not sure I'd go so far as to say a shift in the poetic style, but I see what you mean. These lines do sound... The register of these lines is a little bit different. Just in the way we're kind of... We're backing up and looking at the big picture here. The narrator speaks in a very different way. And the sound of it... I mean... I don't know. I'd have to look more closely to see if I could point to some sort of concrete things that differentiate the style of these lines compared to the others. But the tone is certainly different. Whereas before, we were being brought very close alongside the emotional experience of Gorlim. Now we're at a major distance, right? And being told all of these things very objectively and from the outside. Arthur, I don't make too much of the half line there at the end, because it doesn't end as a half line. It more continues after. I've just stopped there. That's a pretty common technique. A lot of Tolkien sentences end in the middle of the lines. Not all of them, but it's not uncommon for him to do that. That was even more common, I think, in the alliterative lines, but he still does that here quite a bit too. Karita, that's a good point. Karita points out that the word holy, nor holy or his foes prevailed, seems important. That is, he does, in fact, prevail, right? He does win, but he doesn't wholly win. And I agree. I think that's a very important distinction. Now, Brianna points out very rightly that Gorlim does get to undo some of the damage that he does by warning Beren in that dream later. Let's look at that. Because, by good fortune, Beren is off on his own. So here's what happens when he's off on his own. In his sleep he felt a dreadful darkness creep upon his heart, and thought the trees were bare and bent in mournful breeze. No leaves they had, but ravens dark sat thick as leaves on bough and bark, and croaked, and as they croaked each neb let fall a gout of blood. A web unseen entwined him hand and limb, until worn out upon the rim of stagnant pool he lay and shivered. There saw he that a shadow quivered far out upon the water wan, and grew to a faint form thereon, that glided o'er the silent lake, and coming slowly, softly spake, and sadly said, Lo, Gorlim here, traitor betrayed, now stands, nor fear but haste, for Morgoth's fingers close upon thy father's throat. He knows your secret tryst, your hidden lair, and all the evil that he bare, that he had done, and Morgoth wrought. Okay. Sorry, Kate Neville was just saying that holy reminds her of a line in The Lord of the Rings. Let's see, Kate. I'm going to try to guess the line that you're trying to guess. Are you thinking of the phrase, deeds that were not wholly vain? That's my guess, right? It works backwards, right? To say, that some of the deeds of old were not wholly vain, that they were mostly in vain. They didn't accomplish what they set out to accomplish, but they were not wholly vain. Again, the sense is almost reversed there, but it's a similar kind of sense. Anyway, sorry, Kate, I love playing that game. Okay. And Sarah King is wondering, are these the moonless mists of hell that Gorlim is in? Don't know, Sarah. We don't really know much about the moonless mists of hell, really. One thing that is clear, this is, remember, Gorlim's spirit is coming, it is in a dream. Right, so I don't know, where this, is Gorlim's spirit actually walking the earth? We don't have any reason to think that necessarily, because again, it's within his vision. Is this an expression of Gorlim's own will? That does seem to be so. I mean, it's certainly, Brianna, it's nice to think, isn't it, that Gorlim is granted the opportunity to at least partially atone for the sin that he committed, right, for his treason, and thus help Beren to escape, and not only to escape, but also to recover the ring of Barahir at least. So some good does come from from his warning of Beren. How do we read this? Do we read this that he is permitted by the Valar to come back and deliver this message? Is this an act of mercy on Gorlim? Is this an act of penance that he is, sort of part of his penitential process? I don't know. And Karita, I really like the phrase "traitor betrayed" as well. Sharon, Neb is means beak. That's a great old Tolkien word. I say old Tolkien word because people read the Lord of the Rings and they're like, he uses so much archaic language, and it's like, dude, his language is hyper modern in the Lord of the Rings compared to what his language used to be back in the teens and 20s. Read the Book of Lost Tales and the Way of Lothian and stuff, and there you'll see him really whip out the some of his other poetry from that period as well. Neb means beak. It's a great word. He uses the same word when describing the spider creatures that Beren comes in conflict with later on. Good. Good. Arthur says, if I were Beren, I might distrust this vision because it feels like it might be coming out of Angband. Agreed, Arthur. I think it's interesting that Beren doesn't suspect it, actually. It seems to be, that is, the connection between him and Gorlim. He seems to believe Gorlim. He seems to be able, in some sense, to kind of trust the truth of Gorlim. But, and the ravens holding the blood in their mouth and letting it go. It is, Rachel, it is really gross. It is really disturbing. So after this, Beren survives as the only thorn in Morgoth's side, right? He is now the only outlaw left remaining. So the story of Beren is that of the lonely, betrayed, abandoned, final, ultimate outlaw journeying alone, right? So noticed when he's become a man, right? He was an elf in the Tale of Tinuviel. Now he's a man. He's human. But it's not just the fact that he's human. That's, of course, a major, major, major change. I like Christopher Tolkien's word, the cardinal change, as he calls it. It is certainly a cardinal change. But it's not just that. His stature has changed completely. Canto 2 is such an important context for the rest of the poem. And it utterly changes the footing on which the meeting between Beren and Luthian takes place. I think that's really important. Now, let's pause for a second and go back. Yana, I'm getting to potentially where your hell observation might possibly fit in. Remember back to what we were talking about last time when I was talking about Alyssa House Thomas's brilliant theory about the origins of the Lay of Lothian, and particularly of the Melilot manuscript at the beginning of Manuscript Day. And the explanation that Alyssa gives for why he might have done the whole Melilot and Maglor thing. Now, some of you might have been, if you were rereading I wanted to come back to this because I kind of, in some sense, we talked about it a lot last time, but I kind of gave it short shrift in the sense that we were only looking at that opening passage, right? But we have to remember, the Melilot and Maglor thing goes well past those opening. I mean, if all we had were those opening lines, it was like the first 16 lines that we looked at before, with the blonde Melilot and everything else. If that's all we had, it would be it would seem like an easier theory to uphold, right? But it goes through Canto 2. It's Maglor. In the Manuscript A, all this stuff that we've just been reading is Maglor all the way through. And so it's sort of tempting to say, okay, maybe with the Melilot thing, but we're clearly doing Beren's story now, right? Right? By Canto 2? So if so, why is he still called Maglor? Does this fit with Alyssa's theory about the opening of Canto A? Yes, I think it does. Let's look at Christopher's analysis here. So this is what Christopher has to say in the beginning of his analysis about Canto 2. In this second canto, the story of the betrayal of the outlaw band is already an A close to its final form in essentials, but there is no trace of the story in any form earlier than the first drafts of the Lay of Luthian, composed in the summer of 1925. In commenting on the tale of Tinuvio, I noted, it seems clear that at this time the history of Beren and his father Egnor was only very sketchily devised. There is in any case no hint of the story of the outlaw band led by his father and its betrayal by Gorlim the Unhappy before the first form of the Lay of Luthian. So you see what Christopher is doing, right? He's doing his thing, right? Where we've got, hey, okay, so here's how it fits in, right? The tale of Tinuvio, no hint of this background. So the whole story of Gorlim and the outlaw band and everything, right? The unhappy men springs into being here, and then he, is comparing it already to the Silmarillion. So we see the 3 stages, right? And this is where this element of the story comes in. That's it, right? But he's not doing the so what, right? He's just showing us that's what happens. But notice what is to me the most important fact here. There is no trace of Canto 2's story earlier on. That is to say, there is no reason for us to believe that the story of Canto 2 is originally Beren's story from the story of Beren and Luthian, right? We're so familiar with it from the published Silmarillion that we're looking at Gorlim the Unhappy and all these other things. Like, of course, that's Beren's story, right? Not in 1925. It isn't necessarily obviously Beren's story. Remember, it wasn't connected with Beren at all before. This is the very first time it's ever been connected. I think it is quite possible, if not probable, that we're still in the Maglor and Melilot story at this point in Canto 2. All this stuff. In fact, if you think about it, that outlawry stuff, right, that emphasis on outlaws against the usurping King Morgoth fits better into the Melilot and Maglor story. If, as Alyssa was suggesting, the tale of, the Lay of Melilot and Maglor was going to be like a Breton lay, which was taking place, in medieval Brittany, hence the Broceliande stuff. Remember, Christopher Tolkien is also puzzled, like, why is he using the name Broceliande, which is a famous name for a forest in Brittany, right? Why would he do that? Oh, well, he would do that if he were telling a story about Broceliande and not about Beleriand at all, originally, right? Anyway, okay. But again, that outlawry stuff, right? The evil king, and that's what the King Morgoth sounds weird. Doesn't that sound weird coming from the Silmarillion? We never hear anybody. Morgoth claims to be ruler and lord of the world, but we never. The phrase King Morgoth doesn't appear in the Silmarillion. We never think of him that way. But again, in the context of a medieval Breton lay, that we would have an evil king who is not named Morgoth. Did you catch that in Christopher's notes? In the A manuscript, what is the evil king's name? The evil king that we get described at the beginning of the second canto? It's not Morgoth. What's his name? Did you notice? The name Morgoth does not appear in the A manuscript. His name is Bauglir. Bauglir. Exactly, yeah. A couple of you got it. I didn't give you enough time to type. His name is Bauglir, right? So there's this evil King Bauglir who rules and we have this rebellion, this outlaw rebellion. And Tom, yes, King Bauglir is perfect for a medieval lay. It absolutely is perfect. And it makes it, yes, he has used the name Bauglir and will use the name Bauglir again for Morgoth as one of his titles. But again, that makes it perfect as a recycled name. Maglor, Caligorm, we see him recycling a lot of his names in the Lay of Melilot and Maglor, right? So Bauglir makes perfect sense. I would have been surprised had he just recycled Morgoth, but it's not Morgoth that he's recycled, it's Bauglir. So again, so let's pause for a second. Let's sketch out the story of Melilot and Maglor here, right? Well, actually, hang on a second. What about Egnor? Here's another counter argument to the Melilot and Maglor theory, right? The idea that he had started writing this separate Breton lay of Melilot and Maglor, and then sort of transformed it into the Lay of Lothian. And the counter argument would be on Egnor. Egnor is the name in manuscript A of Maglor, right, who will become Baron. So the dude who is the parallel to Baron, his father's name is Egnor in the manuscript. And Baron's father's name was Egnor in the Tale of Tinuviel. So that suggests that the Maglor character is associated with Baron from the beginning, right? So if we theorize that Cantos 1 and 2 were originally the story of Melilot and Maglor, and Baron and Luthian weren't in mind, why is the Baron figure's father's name Egnor like it was in the original, right? I'm not convinced. I think it could still just be recycling of the name. Do I think it's a coincidence that the fathers of those two parallel figures, Baron and Maglor, are both named Egnor? Heck no, I don't think. I don't think it's a coincidence. And why not? Because the story... Nothing would be less... Had Tolkien sat down to write a Breton lay in the early 20s, right? I'm going to write a Breton lay, the story of Maglor and Melilot, right? Had Tolkien, while doing that, had Baron and Luthian, Baron and Tinuviel in the back of his mind as a model for the Melilot and Maglor story, nothing would have surprised me less, right? But now this seems really confusing. So I'm suggesting he was writing this Breton lay as a parallel to Baron and Luthian and then made it into the lay of Baron and Luthian? Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm suggesting. Let me explain how this could work. Here's my fictional reconstruction, my theoretical fictional reconstruction of what might have happened. Right? Okay, here we go. Okay, so here's Tolkien, working on the Book of Lost Tales. He writes the Tale of Tinuviel. This is the first full written version of the story of Baron and Tinuviel, as she's still called at that point. And he loves the Tale of Tinuviel, right? It's got deep personal resonance with him, with his memories of his courtship with Edith. And this is why it's so inconceivable that he's actually going to change the Tinuviel figure, the Luthian figure, into the blonde Melilot, right? I mean, can you even imagine this? Like, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Edith probably knew that Tinuviel was inspired by her, right? I'm just going to go out on a limb and think that Edith, who wrote out the fair copy of big parts of the Book of Lost Tales, right? She was actively involved as a very active reader of the whole Book of Lost Tales thing. I'm going to go out on a limb and suspect that Edith had latched on to the fact that there was a cute personal reference to their own courtship in the story of Baron and Luthian. Okay, so we're suggesting that in the 20s, right? So he comes back. They've now been married for some time, and he's like, so honey, I'm going to take the character, and I'm now picturing her as a younger blonde. Like, seriously? Like, we think that's where Tolkien is going. Sorry, Edith. No offense or anything. It's not like I'm trying to upgrade from you or anything, but I mean, inconceivable. Anyway, okay. Back to my hypothetical fictional reconstruction. So he writes the Tale of Tinuviel, and he loves the Tale of Tinuviel, and the Tale of Tinuviel immediately becomes for him this, like, the quintessential love story in his imagination. It's like the paradigm of love stories. But he's moving on from the Book of Lost Tales, right? You know, he ran into the whole Alfwine problem, and he had to go back and it would have had to rewrite the whole. So he's like, I'm just going to set the Book of Lost Tales aside. I'm going to do something else, right? So he starts writing different poems and stuff. So sometime in the early 20s, he says, hey, I'm going to do a Breton lay. I really like Breton lays. I've been thinking a lot about Breton lays in my scholarship. Now I'm going to do a Breton lay, right? I'm going to do the Breton lay of Melilot and Maglor. I like the name Maglor. I'm going to recycle Maglor. I think I'm going to name Melilot's dad Celegorm, because that's a really good name for a woodland king. So we'll go there. There will be the evil king Bauglir, right? And so he develops this whole story about Maglor, son of Egnor. Now, he's got Baron and Tinuviel that great love story that he already wrote and that he loves, it's in the back of his mind the whole time, right? Of course it is, right? So that the story of Beren and Tinuvio kind of haunts this Breton lay as he's writing it, so that Melilot and Maglor are already kind of parallel to Beren and Tinuvio. How close would that parallel have been? Well, we don't really know, but anyway, you know, is it shocking to me that when he says, okay, the boyfriend, Maglor, okay, Maglor, what's Maglor's dad's name? Egnor, right? Sure. Egnor, Maglor, that works really well together linguistically, and better than Beren and Egnor, really. And since, you know, and again, he's kind of like the Beren parallel in this story, so it's fine. It's all good, right? So he recycles Egnor with Beren and Luthian kind of in the back of his mind. Then he drops the poem. So he gets as far as this, right? He gets as far as the whole rebel band and the sleigh and the Gorlim and the vision and everything else. And then he drops that poem, right? Doesn't finish his Breton lay. Then he's writing the Way of the Children of Hurin, and as we saw, he gets to the point where he's like, I can't take it any longer. I have to stop and write the Way of Beren and Luthian. It's like popping out all over the place as I'm trying to rewrite the Children of Hurin. Obviously, what I really want to write is the Way of Beren and Luthian, so I'm stopping and I'm going to come back to the Way of Beren and Luthian. And at that point, he picks up his old manuscript of the Melilot poem, and he's like, hey, yeah, this works. I'm not going to finish this poem, right? I decided not to do this whole Breton lay thing, but look, I've got all this. I like this stuff. Tolkien really liked the stuff that he had written before, and he rarely trashed it. That is, so often we see it continuing to come back and being kept draft by draft, even when it doesn't make all that much sense. This is why those first few chapters of the Fellowship of the Ring sound so much different than the rest of the Fellowship of the Ring, because he still keeps retaining these elements from the very earliest drafts when the story was totally different than it later on came to be, and yet he keeps them and keeps them and keeps them around. Okay, so exactly, Kate, as you say, he's not just going to waste it. Right? He takes it. He's going to recycle that whole poem. So he goes, but he doesn't start again. He goes back and he touches up that original manuscript. Right? Going to make a few changes. Right? But it's still got the old names in it. But he just sort of continues on the new poem from there. So then, according to this theory, the point at which the names in the A manuscript shift to Beren and Luthian is where he's really begun the Lay of Lothian, where he ceases to be just revising that abortive project that he's now adapting and saying, okay, Melilot and Maglor kind of always were a bit of a ripoff of Luthian and Beren, right? So I'm just going to go whole hog. I'm going to transform this into. I'm going to use this as the foundation of my poem, my extended poem about Beren and Luthian. And then, of course, when he makes the typescript, he changes the names from the beginning, right? And now we've got Thingle, and we've got Luthian, and we've got Beren, and we get Barahir, which is a new thing, and we get King Morgoth, right? Still king, right? Because we're keeping that phrase because it was in the original, but we're going to change his name from Balglir to Morgoth to make that clear. Remind, I'm just making this up, right? I'm not saying this. I'm saying this with no authority, and all I'm doing is just sort of extending Alyssa's idea. Alyssa, of course, you can, if you think if you have any refinements or anything on my little theory here, I'd be happy to hear them. But anyway, I'm just sort of thinking about. First of all, I want to sort of say in specifics. This seems to me to make this is why I love why I have loved Alyssa's idea so much ever since I first heard it, because again, it's the kind of thing that once you start thinking about it, it makes everything click into place. It makes perfect sense of the things which are so mysterious and strange and bizarre about the beginning of this poem. You can, again, all the way through, right? Beren and the Gorlim and the outlaw thing that happens in Canto 2, there's a good reason why there was no hint of it in the Tale of Tinuvio, Christopher. It wasn't there, right? That's Maglor's story. Maglor Melilot's boyfriend's story, not Beren's story. It's only when he decides to make that into the Lay of Lothian that now that becomes Beren's story. Anyway, the bigger point here, the reason I'm dwelling on this is just to kind of say, isn't textual criticism fun? Going back and looking at manuscripts and trying to piece this together, because it's not just about, looking at, earlier versions and revisions and things like that can sound so pedantic, right? And then he changed the name from this spelling to that spelling. He spelled it with an E instead of an A. And it's like, wow, that's incredibly boring. But see how much fun it can be when you really get into this kind of detective work and trying to. I mean, it's the kind of thing that does get, I think anyway, really gripping and fun. Okay, enough sidebar. I shall now more or less permanently leave Melilot and Maglor behind because. But Yana, hell, you see. That line that King Bauglir delivers to Maglor in the Breton lay, of course he would refer to hell, right? It's like a medieval Breton lay. So of course he would talk about, joining her down in hell. And Tolkien just transposes those words to the mouth of Morgoth and Angband where they do make less sense. And it's hard for me to imagine, I mean, maybe, but it's hard for me to imagine that Tolkien would have put those words natively, organically, into Morgoth's mouth, had he written the speech for Morgoth. But it seems to me a very unexceptional thing for Tolkien to have left in Morgoth's mouth under the circumstances of a revision like this. He does leave those kinds of... I mean, that's why we get... references to express trains in Chapter 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring, right? There are no such anachronistic references later on in The Lord of the Rings. The idea of a reference to an express train in The Two Towers is a crazy idea. But it's there in the Chapter 1, right? Why? Because it was there originally when it fit within the narrative style, like the narrative style of The Hobbit. The anachronisms, and there are many, not within the story, but within the narrator, the language that he uses. His reference to Christmas trees, his reference to express trains. There's that other one, the Bilbo's scream in Bag End in Chapter 1 sounds like an express train coming out of a tunnel. So Yana, hell in the way of Melilot would be a purely literal thing. I see no reason not to think that. This King Bauglir guy, whoever exactly he was, would make a reference to hell. Why wouldn't he? Right? He's a medieval king. Even if he's like a medieval fairy king, he still might. Right? Even if there is something otherworldly about him, and we can't rule that out, even within the context of a Breton lay. Still, no reason not to have him make a literal reference to hell, even though, again, Morgoth probably wouldn't do that. Yeah, good. Anyway, okay. Yeah, Talking Foxes, Kate. Exactly, another classic example of the kind of thing that we see in the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring that we don't elsewhere. And again, why do we still see it? Even when Tolkien had decided to go another way? Because he leaves stuff in. It's what he does. I mean, it's amazing. Christopher often will say something like, it is striking to find how close to the final form this, when he's looking at the first drafting, the first version of a story that will later make the published Silmarillion or something, and he will say, it is remarkable how close how nearly this has achieved the final form. And I want to say, yeah, that is remarkable. But Christopher, you could put that the other way around too, and say it's remarkable how the final form has stuck to the original drafting, right? And not left it behind. You could say it that, it's kind of two sides of the same coin to some extent. But again, that seems to me very much in the spirit of Tolkien's revision. But onward and upward. Let us plunge forward into Canto 3. Woohoo! We're making such great progress tonight. This is awesome. I want to look at Thingle and Melian. But Thingle stayed, enchanted, still, one moment to hearken to the thrill of that sweet singing in the trees, enchanted moments such as these from gardens of the Lord of Sleep, where fountains play and shadows creep, do come, and count as many years in mortal lands. With many tears his people seek him ere they sail, while Thingol listens in the dale. But there after but an hour him seems, he finds her where she lies in dreams, pale Melian with her dark hair upon a bed of leaves. Beware, there slumber and asleep is twined. He touches her tresses, and his mind was drowned in the forgetful deep, and dark the years rolled o'er his sleep. Thus Thingol sailed not on the seas, but dwelt amid the land of trees, and Melian he loved, divine, whose voice was potent as the wine the Valar drink in golden halls, where flower blooms and fountain falls. But when she sang it was a spell, and no flower stirred, nor fountain fell. Okay, couple things here. Curitas says, beautiful magical ladies are dangerous, man. Absolute, beware, right? Beware. That beware is to me the most striking thing. Now, the role of this scene, on the one hand, it plays one really simple role. It's a foreshadowing, and it also creates a certain amount of irony in the showdown scene between Beren and Thingol, right? That is, here's Thingol like, oh, how dare you find this magical lady who's so far above you in the woods and presume to, and it's like Mr. Hypocrite, right? So it makes his hypocrisy more keen that we have this memory of it. And again, it's just simply a foreshadowing. But as foreshadowing, it works in a very interesting way, right? Melian and Luthian, Kate, do both have this power of sleep, right? We see it's the thing that enables Luthian to escape later on. So that's true, and we do see the similarities and the parallels between Thingol, between Melian and Luthian, and in the situations between them. But yes, Arthur, you've got it exactly right. Arthur says perhaps it's just because Luthian is a lesser daughter of a greater mother, but I can't help but contrast how Melian lays a spell on Thingol, but Beren lays a spell on Luthian. That's absolutely, Arthur, what I focus on here too, and it's what I think is so striking. This, of course, is foreshadowing of what's going to be happening, and we do see the parallel between them, but they're not parallel, or they're not exactly parallel. There's a hugely important difference. In fact, it's almost a reversal. This establishes the norm. This is kind of what happens with Thingol, is what's supposed to happen. When you come across an elf queen in the woods and you dare to approach her, something's going to happen to you, right? A spell will be laid upon you. It might be awful. You might be killed. You might get turned, it's any number of things. You might be turned into a beast. You might be given an ass's head. Who knows what's going to happen to you, right? You might just go into stasis and fall into a magic sleep for who knows how many centuries. But that's not what happens to Beren, right? So just in case we haven't read the right books, right? I'm thinking about Eustace and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. In case we've read none of the right books, and so we don't know what we should be expecting when Beren leaps out of the bushes and chases after Luthian, when he meets her, we're given a specific setup for that, right? Here's what normally happens in that kind of a circumstance. And the effect of that is absolutely to make the encounter between Beren and Luthian the more striking, right? That moment where his words cast a spell on her and she turns and has mercy on him and enables him to catch her. The miraculous reversal of that scene is preemptively sort of emphasized by this. Tom, as Tom Hillman points out, it is, of course, also perfectly natural. Men are often hypocrites when it comes to their daughters and their daughters' suitors. Absolutely. It is a very, in that way, it's a very verisimilitudinous piece of characterization, right? We might not like Thingol, but again, it does help us to kind of understand him, kind of empathize with him. It makes him, I was about to say more human, which doesn't seem quite right under these circumstances, but I think you know what I mean. Yeah. Yeah, good. Tom adds the reversal of roles and the casting of spells is the proof of doom. Yeah, the proof of the great doom that lies upon Beren. We'll come back to that. The encounter between Beren and Luthian, tempted as I am to read the entire thing, I'm not going to read the entire thing because it's long, and a lot of it is quite similar to Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, as Christopher Tolkien points out. This is another place. I feel bad because I feel like I'm sort of beating up on Christopher Tolkien's commentary. I don't mean to suggest that again. What he does is perfectly useful. It's not his fault that he's not setting out to do what I personally like to do. So again, no blame to him. But again, I do think it's interesting that he points out differences and similarities between the version here and in the poem. But yet again, he doesn't do analysis of those. He doesn't discuss those differences. And I want to look at a few things. I do find he mentions the poem. And I agree with his basic premise that the scene as we get it in the Lay of Lothian is more closely connected to Light as Leaf on Linden Tree than it is to the version of their meeting in the Tale of Tenuvio. I certainly agree with that. But there are some very important differences between what we get in this poem and what we got in the Tale of Tenuvio. In Light as Leaf on Linden Tree. Let's look at one of my favorite of these. The little subtitle I gave to this slide, "He forgot his loneliness." That's the line from Light as Leaf on Linden Tree when Beren first sees Luthian, and remember he came and he was weary and he was lonely. We weren't told where he'd been or what he'd been doing. Right? There's no hint of that in the poem either. In the Linden Tree poem, I mean. But whereas we're just told he forgot his loneliness in the poem, that one concept, that one line, that one word, really almost, is expanded tremendously. And here's what we get in the Lay of Lothian instead. And I love this passage. He gazed, and as he gazed, her hair within its cloudy web did snare the silver moonbeams, sifting white between the leaves, and glinting bright the tremulous starlight of the skies was caught and mirrored in her eyes. Then all his journey's lonely fare, the hunger and the haggard care, the awful mountain stones he stained with blood of weary feet, and gained only a land of ghosts and fear, in dark ravines imprisoned sheer, there mighty spiders wove their webs, old creatures foul with bird-like nebs, that spanned their traps in dizzy air, and filled it with clinging black despair, and there they lived, and sucked the bones, lay white beneath on the dank stones. Now all these horrors, like a cloud, faded from mind. First of all, that's an awesome sentence. Let's play a grammar game again. What's the subject and verb of that sentence? Look back, the sentence starts on line 563 and goes all the way to 576. Right? We've got a 14-line sentence there. What's the subject and verb? I think the syntax of this sentence is important. It's very revealing about the whole flow of the poem in this moment. What's going on in this scene? What's the subject and verb? It's tricky. Yes. The verb is faded. In line 576, the antepenultimate word of the sentence is the main verb. Faded from mind. And Tim, you got it. Journey. Journey. Fair, technically. His journey's lonely fare. Then all his journeys lonely fare, the hunger and the haggard care. What did all these things do? Okay, technically all actually is the subject, but anyway, that stuff, right? All that stuff faded. How does this sentence work? It starts off by describing the thing, and then in describing the subject, what it is that's fading from his mind, we get this continuous dilation, this almost sort of nightmarish association, sort of horrible memory association as your mind leaps from one terrible memory to another in this rapid and inescapable train, right? From all his journeys lonely fare. It starts off with the loneliness, like in the poem, right? All this, all of his weary journey, and the hunger. It was a hungry journey. He didn't have much food on this journey. It was awful. It was awful. And the haggard care. He was really worried. Lots of anxiety in this journey. Yeah, it's pretty bad. The awful mountain stones he stained with blood of weary feet. Oh, that's pretty bad. And gained only a land of, and after doing that, he gained only, what did he accomplish by that feat of crossing the rocks where he's leaving his own blood, this trail of his own blood upon the rocks? Because he only gained a land of ghosts, right? Oh boy, and there was fear, and then the spiders, right? All this stuff just gets kind of, all these things faded from mind, right? I love the fact that we don't get any of these details of Beron's journey, right? Beron's journey is just mentioned at the end of Canto 2 in brief, and we only hear about it in flashbacks as we're told he's forgetting about it, right? As if to emphasize how all of the sort of the extremity of all of the things that he is forgetting. There's this tremendous. Well, let's keep reading. But again, you see how the syntax works. The way that this sentence just kind of runs away with itself. We get caught up in this string of terrible memories from Beron, but then we come back. Now all these horrors, like a cloud, faded from mind. Right? We kind of cut them off and say they faded from mind. But he's not done. The waters loud, falling from pine-clad heights, no more he heard. So again, I love the negatives here, right? All of these things, he stopped thinking about them. These sounds, he stopped hearing, right? Those waters gray and frore, that bittersweet he drank and filled his mind with madness. Yeah, those waters, all was stilled. He recked not now the burning road, the paths demented where he strode endlessly, and ever new horizons stretched before his view, as each blue ridge with bleeding feet was climbed, and down he went to meet battle with creatures old and strong, and monsters in the dark and long, long watches of the haunted night, where evil shapes with baleful light in clustered eyes did crawl and snuff beneath his tree. Not half enough the price he deemed to come at last to that pale moon when day had passed, to those clear stars of elfiness, the heart's ease and the loveliness. The final, so all of these negatives, right? He no longer thought about that. He no longer heard this. He no longer recked about that, right? He no longer thought about that. All of these things, he now considered not half enough the price he deemed to come at last to that pale. It was all worth it. He'd have gone through twice as much to get to this point, right? I just weigh all of this against he forgot his loneliness, right? What this excellent, Tom. Tom says, yet were his suffering good for this. Absolutely. The way that Tolkien uses Beron's memories of his evil road and the passage through, and the giant hideous spiders that he fought, and all of his sufferings and torments, and just uses that as a frame to put us so much more powerfully in the position of Beron and what he was thinking and what he was feeling when he was encountering Luthian for the first time, right? All these things were worth it, more than worth it. All of this stuff was forgotten compared to this. yeah, it's yeah. Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, nice, nice. Nancy points out that she loves the line that ends with long and then the next one starts with long. Notice all the enjambment, the way that these lines really all tumble into each other. And that's a really fun one, right? And monsters in the dark and long, long watches of the haunted night. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really that's a particularly fun piece of enjambment there. So anyway, the way that Tolkien has integrated the new epic background. Thanks, Maglor, Melilot's boyfriend, for the new epic background for Baron. It's just gorgeous, and it's so emotionally powerful. The way that puts in the sort of additional meaning, the additional sort of pressure that is put upon the meeting with between Baron and Luthian. It's just, I mean, it was already amazing in the poem, in Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, and it's now just much, much more. I couldn't help but point out this next bit. It's a really small thing, but it really jumped out at me. Again, I know what's with me and the picking on Christopher Tolkien today. Christopher Tolkien points to this as a similarity between the Light as Leaf on Linden Tree and the Lay of Lothian, that the moths that were there in the Light as, remember the lumbering moths, right? They were there in the Linden Tree poem, and they've remained in the Lay of Lothian. He points that out as one of the similarities between the poem and this, and that's all he says. Notice anything interesting here? Then stared he wild and dumb. So he's just jumped out the first time, right? And Luthian and Dairon scatter. Then stared he wild in dumbness bound at silent trees, deserted ground. He blindly groped across the glade to the dark trees encircling shade, and while she watched, she's not run away, she's hiding there, right, watching him. And while she watched with veiled eyes, touched her soft arm in sweet surprise. Like startled moth from death-like sleep, in sunless nook or bushes deep, she darted swift, and to and fro with cunning that elvish dancers know, about the trunks of trees she twined a path fantastic. Yeah, Karita, you've got it. See again, Christopher Tolkien casually says this is a similarity. I mean, yeah, in the sense that it's a moth, but she's the moth this time. Last time he was the one. The moths came in with Baron, and they followed after her just like he follows after her, right? He was the moth. Now she is explicitly being compared. Now we've got this moth simile for her, right? But she's like a moth hiding in the bushes, right? Darting from death-like sleep in sunless nook or bushes deep, right? Where do moths go in the daytime? Well, they hide deep in the bushes, right? That's where they go. And she is startled out of the, she was as still as still and as hidden as a moth in death-like sleep. Sharon, we have no lumbering whatsoever, right? Tom, what a great question. Tom Hillman asks, whose is the sweet surprise? Tom, like, for whom is that surprise? Presumably they're both surprised, perhaps, right? Well, he's got to be more surprised than she is, right? Because she knows where she is and he doesn't. She presumably has much more awareness of he's the one groping across the glade in the darkness, presumably not silently. Baron probably doing a bit of lumbering here, right? But she is the one who is silent and hidden and still. So I would think if anybody's surprised, it's got to be him who's surprised. And it would, of course, Tom, make sense that his surprise would be the sweet surprise. Kate points out that she is bird-like as well later on, absolutely. But I love the reversal. And I love the foreshadowing that's sort of implicit in that reversal, right? We've already seen, we did get moths earlier on too. She in the moonlight was being followed by moths, just like it was in the poem. So that similarity is there. And And so we do have that as a sort of a setup of his and the way that he is attracted to her and comes blindly groping, leaping, lumbering out to pursue her in this very first encounter is very blind and moth-like, right? So we do have that anticipation of Beron's own attraction to her in the moths, but then it gets reversed, right? Foreshadowing the reversal that's going to come later on when he casts a spell on her. Yes, Arthur, it's very mothopoetic. Absolutely, a very mothopoetic moment. Very good. Yeah, I agree. Good. Okay. Let's look at the binding spell. But as she went, this is not the same time. This is later when he sees her for that third time. He saw her from a distance a second time in the winter time, and now as spring is coming, he sees her for the third time. But as she went, he swiftly came and called her with the tender name of nightingales in elvish tongue, that all the woods now sudden rung, Tinuviel, and clear his voice was as a bell, its echoes wove a binding spell, Tinuviel, his voice such love and longing filled, one moment stood she, fear was stilled. One moment only, like a flame, he leaped towards her as she stayed, and caught and kissed that elfin maid. He's like a flame. It's like the flame is catching the moth, right? Oh man. What do you notice? What do you notice here about this moment, specifically about how Tolkien treats this in his verse compared to what we saw in Light as Leaf on Linden Tree? Yes, Kimber, we do see. It is interesting that her name is the spell that he says, and that we see is still identical. Tinuviel. Of course, the meter is still the same as in Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, so that still works. So that's unchanged, and I think that's really important. More. What else? Yeah, Tom, it's the echoes. And that's really important. I don't know if you remember that line from the original poem. It's a little unfair to expect you to have Light as Leaf on Linden Tree memorized, but I did actually refer to this line in the title of the last class. In this spot in Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, his voice was like the echo of a spell. And now its echoes wove a binding spell. See the difference? There's nothing echoey about this binding spell. The spell is binding, right? And clear his voice was as a bell, its echoes wove a binding spell. His voice, like echo of a spell, is very different, right? The implication in Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, his voice isn't a spell. It's like the echo of a spell. It's like a spell, but it isn't a spell. Here, the wording describing his voice and the power of his voice on her is stronger. The echoes, the mere echoes of his voice weave a binding spell about her. And that, I think, is really, really interesting, right? But why? Why? His voice such love and longing filled. One moment stood she. Look at the syntax of that for a second. His voice such love and longing filled. When you think about that line, it doesn't actually say what we think it means, right? You read that line and it sounds obvious, right? His voice is filled with such love and longing, right? That's not what the line says. What does it say? Yeah, his voice filled love and longing. His voice such love and longing filled one moment stood she. What's being filled with what, right? It filled one moment. Sharon, that does seem to be literally longing filled one moment. It seems, again, the way that he's shifted the syntax there, it's enough to evoke the idea that his voice is filled with love and longing, but the ambiguity of the syntax, I would call the syntax of that line ambiguous, but I think it's deliberately ambiguous, right? It's because it's not just that his voice is filled with love and longing, it's that his voice fills her with love and longing. And that's what stills her fear. It does both, right? Both are filled. That's why filled is kind of ambiguously sitting in the middle of that sentence. Isn't that awesome? And notice the way, again, the binding spell of his words. Notice what poetic technique Tolkien uses to emphasize the incantatory nature of his words. The power, the binding power of his words. How does he emphasize that through his poetic technique there? Notice what happens with the rhymes? It's very simple. The thing I'm referring to is very simple, that is. It's very simple, but it's kind of unusual in this poem. What's the rhyme pattern of this poem? Couplets, right? I'm asking such easy questions. You are like, this has got to be a trick question, right? It's in couplets. But yeah, Kimber, we get that break with Tinuviel, right? It's one of the very few places in this poem where we get the same rhyme repeated for two couplets in a row. Really simple effect, but you can hear it, right? He swiftly came and called her with that tender name of nightingales in elvish tongue that all the woods now sudden rung. Tinuviel, Tinuviel, and clear his voice was as a bell. Its echoes wove a binding spell. Tinuviel, Tinuviel. These four lines framed by Tinuviel, Tinuviel, right? And so the sort of momentum of that rhyme, Tinuviel, as a bell, binding spell, Tinuviel, right? It's a small thing, but it has, I think, a really important kind of oral effect there that really makes that whole set of four lines framed by her name really stand out. Several great observations that you guys are making here. Yeah. Oh, very good, Kimber. Kimber is noticing that it breaks for flame, the rhyming pattern. Good, yeah, Kate was just pointing that out too. Yeah, good. Flame has no couple, right? One moment stood she, fear was stilled. One moment only, like a flame, he leaped towards her as she stayed and caught and kissed that elfin maid. Barren like a flame is on its own. Right, one moment only, as Sarah Lagarde points out. And good, as Sarah also then points out, it picks up on her again. But as she went, he swiftly came and called her with a tender name. One moment only, like a flame, recalls that. Yes, it does. Really fun stuff. Really, I just love this stuff. He caught and kissed that elfin maid. We do get a kiss here. Now, as several of you are pointing out, and Tom, I do agree. There's an important assonance there with flame, stayed, and maid. Even though flame doesn't rhyme with stayed and maid, and we do get a couplet in stayed and maid. The flame doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. It doesn't. Although it breaks the pattern, it doesn't feel like it breaks the pattern when you're reading it because of that assonance. I think that would be why. The two other great observations you guys are making. First, how closely parallel but reversed this is to Thingle and Melian, right? So we can see sort of the power of that established norm. Yeah, as Kate, as you say, it's really almost the mirror image, because it's it's her voice that captures him. Yeah, absolutely. The difference between her, Melian, just lying there, right, and him approaching her and touching her, and Luthian turning and she turning to flee but stopping, and him catching her. Anyway, and of course the other point, as several of you are very aptly reminding us, remember this is about release from bondage, right? Sorry. Almost had to sneeze, but didn't quite. Okay, I think I've escaped it. Release from bondage, right? Caught and kissed that elfin maid, right? So now Luthian is in bondage, right? Is this bondage, or is this the release from bondage? We see the way, all of the different the complexities and the ironies of that title, and the way that works through all of this. Okay. We're gonna so not get as far behind as we're threatening to get. Let me just skip ahead and look at. I only want to look at one passage each from the next two cantos, which is not really fair. There's a lot more, of course, that we could talk about. One reason that I am not spending as much time on Canto 4, apart from the fact that I don't have as much time to spend, but the other reason is now here I wholeheartedly agree and fully endorse Christopher Tolkien's analysis of Canto 4, that it is very close to the published Silmarillion, and we do see that there are some deviations, but it's very, very similar. That's no reason not to talk about it at all, but there's sort of less, I think, to try to sort of capture the spirit that makes this poem kind of unique in it. But one passage that I certainly couldn't resist talking about is the morning after, when Beren wakes up, and we get this passage, which I find so striking in this poem. And thus in anguish Beren paid for that great doom upon him laid, the deathless love of Luthian, too fair for love of mortal men, and in his doom was Luthian snared, and deathless in his dying shared, and fate them forged a binding chain of living love and mortal pain. Beyond all hope her feet returned at eve, when in the sky there burned the flame of stars, and in her eyes there trembled the starlight of the skies, and from her hair the fragrance fell of elven flowers in elven dell. And fate them forged a binding chain. Notice this, his voice wove a binding spell, and now fate is forging a binding chain. Yeah, it's about the release from bondage, right? Thus in anguish Beren paid for that great doom upon him laid. What, waking up and finding her not there? Thus in anguish Beren paid for that great doom? I don't think Tolkien is here suggesting that really bad feeling that Beren had, because, it's a really bad, he thinks that she's gone, right? Remember, Beren knows that this whole thing is working against the script, right? He knows that when you are a mortal and you go jumping out after a fairy princess dancing in the moonlight, it's not going to end well for you, right? That just never works out for the mortal in question, right? Beren knows this full well. So he wakes up the next morning and is in anguish. Right, now it comes. Now the other shoe falls, right? I knew that was too good to be true, but now I have to endure the loss. Not just it's been months, right? It's been the turning of the months, as we saw in Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, that he's been in Doriath and he's been pursuing her, and now it finally came together, right? And then he lost it. Okay, right? So he thinks this is forever. He has every reason to think it's forever. But of course, even that moment has a happy ending. But when he talks about the anguish with which Beren paid for the great doom upon him laid, this is only one moment, right? The clear message, I think, being conveyed here is Beren isn't living happily ever after here. This is not a happily ever after moment. Although things work out unusually well for the mortal in this position, he's done better than any mortal could possibly expect to in a parallel story. I don't think that means he's not going to pay a cost. He's not going to pay a price, that this stuff comes without a cost, right? It does come with a cost. And he's going to pay for it. And he's going to pay for it in anguish. He is bringing himself in for a world of hurt. But that's okay. We already saw the world of hurt that he's left behind, which he considers like half the price. More than twice that would have been worth it to come to that moment before, right? So we know he's willing to pay that price. But there is a price. Kimber is thinking that it sounds like Beren is upset that Luthien's fate has been messed up. Possibly, I don't know to what extent Beren knows that right now. He knows that she's too fair for love of mortal men, right? Absolutely. And Kimber, you're certainly right that later on, as the story progresses, a central part of Beren's anguish is the sense that his knowledge that he's bringing her into danger. And we will see when we get to, and we will totally get to, discussing the later cantos where he's continually trying to leave her behind. We will see that informing his decision to do that, right? His anguish that he is bringing her into sorrow and into pain and into suffering and grief. When he endured all that he endured to get to her and found it all worth it, and he considers it all worth it to basically go back and do worse. That's what he's leaving Nargothrond. That's what Nargothrond, but that's not what he's leaving Doriath to do. When he agrees, when he swears the oath, he makes his promise to Thingle. He's basically signing himself up for that second half, that doubling of anguish that he experienced to come there. It's going to be worth it. He will go through that, right? But to bring her into that, he doesn't. That's anguish to him. He doesn't want that. So Kimber, we will see that become increasing. I don't think that's what he's thinking in this moment when he's lying there on his face on the cold earth, thinking that all is lost here. But that certainly is going to come into the story very, very clearly. Tom, of course, points out that you can't be released from bondage until you are first bound. This is true, but again, it doesn't even work. It still doesn't work that neatly, though, right? Because I cannot, of all of the things that release from bondage could mean in the Beren and Luthian story, I can't imagine it's from the bond of their own love together, right? Of the binding chain with which fate has bound them together. If that's bondage, then surely they're not going to be released from that bondage. What seems instead to be the case is a kind of a paradox here, right? That their binding together is release. That seems to be that kind of paradox seems to me to be at the heart of the release from bondage stuff that we get in this poem. But of course, this isn't the only place we're going to get the release from bondage stuff. All right, let's keep going a little bit. So I'm skipping the meeting with Dad. It's hard because it's a really good passage, but we're going to be so disciplined, and we're going to skip that. I was really interested in Luthien's cloak. So now she's been, guess what? Bound in prison, up in Hirelorn, up in the beach. And here's the cloak that she weaves from her hair. Of cloudy hair she wove a web like misty air of moonless night, and thereof made a robe as fluttering dark as shade beneath great trees, a magic dress that all was drenched with drowsiness, enchanted with a mightier spell than Melian's raiment in that dell, wherein of yore did Thingle roam beneath the dark and starry dome that hung above the dawning world. And now this robe she round her furled, and veiled her garments shimmering white, her mantle blue with jewels bright like crystal stars, the lilies gold were wrapped and hid, and down there rolled dim dreams and faint oblivious sleep, falling about her to softly creep through all the air. First of all, you notice that she's still wearing Melilot's dress, the blue dress with the golden lilies on it, which were not so golden as her hair in the Melilot pose. So Luthian still is wearing Melilot's dress. But anyway, apart from that, notice the connection with Melian there, right? The explicit recollection of the spell of sleep that Melian laid upon Thingle upon their meeting. That is the same spell that Luthian weaves into her cloak, with which she is going to escape from Thingle to join her. So the way that, again, we get a reversal, but also a playing off of this, the way in which we see Thingle being sort of having this kind of comeback, his own sort of hypocrisy kind of coming back against him. I think it's really interesting. And yes, Kimber, it's even it does seem even mightier than Melian's spell. I mean, it doesn't put people to spell for like centuries or anything, but it's certainly more general than Melian's spell. We'll come back to Luthian's cloak. I'm very interested in the process by which Luthian enchants both her hair and her cloak. It's a fascinating scene in the Tale of Tinuvio, in the Book of Lost Tales, and the as Christopher points out, the Luthian version does follow that very closely. So we'll come back to that a little bit more next time, but I do think it's really fascinating. One more sort of random passage. This from Cantos VI. See, look how fast we're going now. I love the depiction of Curufin's Nargothrond. That is, this is the end of the speech. So Celegorm has given his speech, wherein he reiterates the oath of the sons of Feanor, and then Curufin does his bit. Look at how Nargothrondian, there's no more Rodolflin. There isn't an adjectival form for Nargothrond anymore. Anyway, look at where this goes. This Curufin, when his brother ceased, did then begin more to impress upon their minds, and such a spell he on them binds, that never again till Turin's day would gnome of Narog in array of open battle go to war. With secrecy, ambush, spies, and lore of wizardry, with silent leaguer of wild things wary, watchful, eager, of phantom hunters' venomed darts, and unseen stealthy creeping arts, with padded hatred that its prey with velvet feet, with feet of velvet all the day, followed remorseless out of sight, and slew it unawares at night. Thus they defended Nargothrond, and forgot their kin and solemn bond, for dread of Morgoth that the art of Curufin set within their heart. Nargothronian, I like that, Sarah. That sounds bad, doesn't it? Right? It's not just that they become really fearful and more cautious than ever about revealing themselves. The Silmarillion doesn't go into such detail as this. This sounds awful, like an active corruption of their society. Sarah, I agree. Why are they doing wizardry but no sigildry? Seriously, what were they thinking? But yeah, Kimber, they become secretive predators. Absolutely. I love that image with padded hatred, that its prey with feet of velvet all the day, followed remorseless out of sight, and slew it unawares at night. It's not just like, we're not going to show ourselves and we're going to fight from hiding instead. We're going to pursue you silently with hatred and then kill you in your sleep. It's not quite evil, but it's close to it. It's really creepy. Well, it's literally creepy. The stealthy creeping arts, right? But it's... Mary Rose. Bad ninjas. Very, very, very ninja-like society they become, right? It's kind of awful. Notice the effect of that. Who gains by that? What's the net result of making Nargothrond under the influence of Curufin sound so awful as this? Felagund, of course, by contrast. Who else by contrast? Yes, Kate. Turin, right? Turin, not till Turin's day did this policy change. So when Turin came, Turin's change of policy isn't a complete disaster, right? I mean, okay, it doesn't end well, but I wonder. Again, in the later versions, Turin's decision, Turin's influence in Nargothrond is bad, right? I mean, Turin, when at the end of the Nargothrond incident, in Turin's life, Glaurung accuses him of being, a curse. Well, no, I'm thinking of the lines that said at the end of Glaurung's life. But anyway, when Glaurung calls him, a curse to his kin and to everyone who takes him in, you can say, like, it's kind of fair, right? Yeah, he kind of did bring disaster everywhere he went, and through his own actions, through his own choices. It's not just that misfortune followed wherever he went, but all of the stuff that he does, even when he's trying to do good things, ends disastrously, and in large part because of his own choices. That's the later Turin, right? But remember, the Turin that we were seeing in the Lay of the Children of Húrin wasn't like that. At least not nearly so strongly. And in particular, remember, we broke off that poem in Nargothrond. And one of the things that we were sort of immediately curious about is what would have happened there. What would Turin's later time in Nargothrond have looked like in the poem with that Turin that we were getting there? Were we going to get the arrogant, overweening Turin who openly defies Olmo and gets into a fight with Olmo's messengers when they come to warn him, right? Is that what we would have gotten from Turin? Conceivably, but that doesn't sound like the Turin we were seeing in the Lay of the Children of Húrin. And so here, with the particularly creepy and evil sounding, or at least corrupt and corrupted outlook and attitude and actions of the people of Nargothrond, Turin coming in and convincing the gnomes of Narog in array of open battle to go to war, kind of sounds like it might be actually a positive change. Again, I don't know, but it's one of the things. But I was really struck by how bad this sounded. Curufin is an extremely sketchy character in this poem. I think even more so than in the published Silmarillion. Okay. I should let you go now. Next time, I promise, we didn't quite get to Thu, the necromancer. I promise we will do both Thu and Huon next time. And maybe with great good fortune we will get as far as Morgoth and the Silmaril. We'll see. Anyway, so yeah, no, Arthur, the Thu part was in the reading for tonight, but we didn't quite get to. We're up to Canto VII. At least that's where I'm going to start next time. Not that we discussed 4, 5, and 6 at all thoroughly, but I'm going to jump up to Canto VII and focus on the Thu stuff for next time. But yeah. Anyway, okay. Thanks, everybody. I look forward to getting to Thu and Huan and maybe even to Morgoth next time. We'll see. Thanks very much. And don't forget about the fall classes, Film on Friday, and the Midmood event, the Mid-Atlantic Mythgard Symposium, Speculative Fiction Symposium. Make sure to look that up. Thanks, everybody. Good night now.